COVID vaccinations begin this week in Rwanda. Now the country has received its first doses. The COVAX initiative has sent 250,000 doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine and more than 100,000 of Pfizer. Kenya and Nigeria are receiving their first shipments on Tuesday, and initiative aims to supply $2 billion to low-income countries by the end of the year. It's backed by the World Health Organization and the GAVI Vaccine Alliance. The president of Rwanda told me his country is welcoming all the help it can get.
We see the rest of the world vaccinating. We haven't. We haven't had so many, if at all, in Africa. So that means we are still far behind on the queue, and as I can see it, some people are not on the queue at all. So we are on the queue, we are waiting. So we will take any vaccines that come that we are told actually works. So whether it is Pfizer, it is Moderna, we want to have any of those as fast as we can.
Dr. Seth Berkley is the CEO of GAVI, joins me now from Geneva. Doctor, it is always good to see you. You're getting on with it, really, aren't you? I mean, more countries are getting their first and second shipments. The numbers remain low, relatively, and I wonder when you think that will accelerate.
So, Richard, very good to see you again. And last time we talked, we hadn't started yet. We had the concept, and now we're in implementation. So the idea, of course, is to try to get these doses out as quickly as possible across all countries, because we're worried about the new variants. We're worried about continuing spread. So the idea is to try to get to healthcare workers and to get to people at risk across all countries. And so only 2 weeks ago was the WHO approval, the regulatory approval, and that kicked us into gear. We've delivered 10 million doses in 14 countries so far, and we will now be doing at least another 10 million in the next week and scaling up from there. So yes, not enough doses, and not as quick as we would like. It took us 83 days from the first jab in the UK to the first jab in Africa, but now we're off to try to get as much of this out as we can.
Right, now this could be interesting because the dynamic is shifting. For instance, President Biden says the US will have enough COVID vaccine doses for every adult in the US in less than 3 months. It's one of the most ambitious vaccine timelines. The UK has a target for every adult by the end of July. Israel, as you know, has given shots to more of its population than any other country. So as more of these countries vaccinate, and I use the phrase surplus advisedly, do you believe that you can get your hands on more of that surplus?
Well, of course, the original challenge was that initially large orders were put in place that locked up lots of doses. So we've been able to get about 2.5 billion doses, but a fair amount of those are going to be in the second half of the year. So we are looking for early doses. It's estimated that there are about 800 million more doses bought by countries than they need based on their population, and another 1.4 billion in options. So our hope is that some of those will either be donated or they will release their place in the queue so we can make sure we make vaccines available to everyone else.
Do you have the money, the donor pledges, do you have the money necessary? Not whether it's sufficient or not, but do you have the money necessary?
So we had a really wonderful G7 meeting where the U.S. stepped forward and committed 2 out of their 4 billion for this year. We also had Germany step up 980 million euros. We had continued support from the EC, additional support. And so we've reached now 6.3 billion out of our 7 billion total for the 2 billion doses. And so we're getting close now.
Is there any requirement for, there's 90-odd countries who are on the other side of the equation, of course, who will be receiving this. I'm not suggesting you use vaccines for policy, but is there, what requirements do the countries have to provide? I'm thinking in some cases, some of these countries spend quite a hefty amount on defence, armaments, money that could be spent on helping their own people get vaccinated?
Well, of course, the challenge that these countries would have is partially financial, but a big part of it is the ability to purchase vaccines in a really, over-demanded market. And so what was really important is the ability to go out and make large orders for large amounts of doses. We, of course, have a lot of requirements for our countries. They have to have regulatory approval, indemnification and liability, a working cold chain, prepare their health workers. They have to have a strategy for how to use these vaccines, export permits, import permits, et cetera. So a lot of work is going to get all of these countries ready. But at the moment, we don't get involved with the politics. We're about trying to save lives.
Let's listen to your former chair, Ngozi Iweala, who, of course, is now head of the World Trade Organization. Speaking on this program exclusively, she made it clear that opening up world trade was also a vaccination issue. But she put into context the number of vaccines required. Have a listen to Ngozi.
There's a huge supply constraint in the whole world. Normally, the world manufactures 3.5 billion doses of vaccines a year. Now we're looking for 10 billion, so 3 times the number. And that's why supply is so scarce. So my focus is, whilst we're discussing the issue of a waiver of TRIPS intellectual property for developing countries, can we work with manufacturers to find many more sites within emerging markets and developing countries that have the capacity to manufacture more vaccines?
I can see the jigsaw, Doctor, coming together of all the different parts, adding their bit to create the whole. But I worry, Ngozi talks about 10 billion of doses needed. If the variants require almost annual updates, boosters, new, like the flu, then you're in deep trouble.
Well, not necessarily. The real challenge is this year and next year. The world can scale up, and Ngozi's absolutely right. It's the speed of the slope that is the challenge. But at the moment, if we were to have to switch vaccines or to add a booster this year, then of course that really, really is a problem given the limited capacity. So what we're doing is technology transfer to as many companies as we can. And so we're also happy to see things like President Biden's new effort where he took J&J and brought it together with Merck, with the idea being that even though they're normally competitors, they could work together to increase the volume of production of vaccine. That's the type of cooperation we need to have with every company anywhere in the world who has the ability to do this production.
And that's a valid point as we move forward to looking at that. Thank you, sir. As always, it's always good to talk to you, Doctor. I appreciate your time tonight. Appreciate it.